Hey, Pat, are you with us?
I'm here now.
Okay, you might need to got an email from Jack
Yeah,
saying you got to split time. So okay,
yeah, I know. So
Okay.
get everything adjusted here properly. How you been doing, Will?
Hey, doing really well. How are you?
I'm doing fine. Doing fine.
Pat, did you make it through? Did you make it through your burn pile yet?
Oh yeah.
You're a pro.
My wife's a pro.
Oh, okay.
She's the pyromaniac in the family.
You want to buy an orchard near my house?
No. You want to buy one?
No.
I'm trying to decide what to do.
I have a one of my neighbors. The Fox Orchard is up for sale.
Oh, okay. So where are you located at?
I'm immediately to their west. They're my neighbor on the west side.
On which side? Which orchard? They got so many of them.
This would be the orchard on Fletcher and kind of Straight Hill.
Okay. Yep. Okay. I know that one. So you're up there by the winery then?
I am.
Oh,
We're doing okay. We live
Yeah.
out there in the woods, a safe distance from this craziness.
yes. Yes. Evening, Abigail.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Yeah,
How are you tonight?
I'm doing fine. I'm doing
Good.
fine.
Good.
So Jack's going to be jumping in and out then, right, Will?
I saw that note.
Yeah,
Okay.
it sounds like it. Mhm.
Okay. And we got one public testimony from Jody.
Correct.
Okay. I happened to see her. I had to go into the store today and I saw her in there. So she said she was going to testify tonight.
And we're at 5:30, so we can open this up. Jen, are you controlling over there?
Yep, I'm ready to go.
Okay. just
I
a
don't see
second.
Jody in the audience yet, though, so hopefully she'll join here in a couple minutes.
Okay. Well, it's 5:30, so we'll call the meeting to order. Since Jack's not on the line, I'm Pat McAllister, I'm the vice chair. So we have one business from the audience, but Jody's not on. Is that correct, Jen?
That's right.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
that's correct.
when she becomes available, you'll let us know and we'll interrupt our meeting and move on with her testimony. Am I
Okay,
correct?
sounds-
Am I correct in understanding she has 3 minutes or so?
That's right.
Okay. Moving on to the next item, then, agenda for additions or corrections. Are there any?
No, they're not.
Okay. Next, we have approval of the minutes of the July 17th, 2021. Jen sent that out to everyone. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes that need to be noted? If there's not, I'll entertain a motion to accept the minutes as presented.
I'll move to accept the minutes as written and
Is
delivered.
that you, Clint? Was that Clint?
That was Clint.
It was.
Okay. Is there a second?
Yeah, this is Josh Chandler. I second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the minutes of June 17th. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, Josh Chandler.
Anybody else there? This is the hard part of running a meeting via Zoom. Well, I'll assume that that's been approved, so we'll move on to the next item, item 5, Urban Renewal Administrator. I take it is that Dustin or is that Will?
Yeah, I think that's Will, but he's got himself on mute, so I'll step
okay.
in.
Okay.
Staff,
Okay, Will.
staff generally. Dustin's taking this one.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you're aware, we're in the midst of going through the streetscape project for the Heights. And a component of that, which was added, included a parking analysis. One of the impacts and potential impacts and areas that we wanted to become informed of was really some of the status of the parking, the availability of the parking, and what could be the potential impacts or benefits to parking. As we looked at a project and in context of the streetscape redevelopment. So we have a couple of our team members here. We have Nathan Polanski from MIG in the audience, as well as John Boskett from DKS and Associates. Nathan is a part of they're both part of the project management team. John's team has led much of the parking effort and the analysis of that, as well as they're the city's really key advisor in transportation issues in general, as far as the transportation system plan and overall impact. So we're thankful they've been able to make it tonight. I think one item to note is, unlike other parking studies for downtown, this effort was not a parking policy analysis. Is really more of an inventory and the usage and some forecasted assumptions regarding not only the parking that is there today, but under some growth that we would expect in the future, the needs of parking based on a forecast and some assumptions here. So with that lead up, I turn it over to John and Nathan for some high points on this. And I think, John, you have a presentation ready to share some slides and some findings.
Yep, I do. So let me see. Actually, how do I share my screen on this? Oh, there it is. Right in front of me. I'll blame the cold. I'm severely under the weather, so I will try to keep it together and mute myself through all my coughing. All right, so hopefully you've all got that on your screen. All right. So yes, thanks for the lead in there, Dustin. And so kind of what I'll walk through here is I'll just start with a little bit of background on what we did and maybe kind of what maybe we didn't cover in this parking study, so you kind of understand the parameters of it a little bit. And then we'll cover what we saw happening today with the existing parking supply versus the demand. And then talk about that projection, how we kind of looked out into the future to say, okay, if we had a little bit more growth like we're hoping to get in the Heights, how does that change the kind of the supply versus demand equation there? So starting off with just kind of the background, as Dustin kind of mentioned, the purpose of the study was to evaluate, parking types and availability within the Heights District, considering existing development as well as future development. And then, also because of some of the things we're considering with the streetscape planning is hopefully, this can be used to support some of the decision making related to those trade-offs about on-street parking in place of getting improved facilities for people walking and biking. And so, to start, because kind of the boundaries of the parking study that we did, there's the map here on the right, and that was from May Street, down to just past Belmont at the north and south extents, and obviously covering 11th and 12th, the whole couplet there. And then we went a little bit east and west because, some of the business parking can wrap around to the side streets. So we went a little bit further, east and west of 12th. And we kind of notched off. We didn't want to capture the hospital. They've got lots of on-site parking and a whole parking garage, so we kind of cut that corner and cut their properties out of it. So that is the area that we considered. As far as time periods, we did our parking observations on one weekday and one weekend day. So that was Tuesday, August 17th, and then it was Saturday, August 21st. It was 6 hours of observations during each day. But on the weekday, we did a 7 to 9 a.m. block, and then a 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. block, and a 4 to 6 p.m. Whereas on the weekend, we just went 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. And then we recorded occupancy on once every hour as we went around. And this included both on-street parking as well as off-street. So we looked at, private lots and how full those were as well as we went through. And I'll talk about this more, but the future demand, we estimated using some housing and employment growth assumptions that had been used for prior city transportation modeling, and then apply the existing parking characteristics to those growth assumptions. But I'll come back to that later. So, a few things that we didn't do here. One is, we looked at the heights as a whole. And obviously, it's with the mix of uses, it's very much a place where somebody could park in one spot but visit multiple destinations. And we didn't, track, people's movements through the heights, as they parked. We didn't survey businesses or, customers or people that are visiting the heights. We were only noting if a parking spot was full or empty. And so a lot of that shared parking activity probably was happening and could be happening, but we didn't track that. We also didn't look at turnover, so we didn't document how long a specific car might be sitting in a spot, which kind of helps you understand maybe some compliance issues, because there are places where maybe parking is signed to be limited to a certain time period, but we weren't recording whether or not people are actually abiding by that. Anecdotally, I know there were just a lot of observations where people are not complying with any restrictions, and so there was kind of a lot of enforcement need we were noting, and we didn't compare the existing parking supply to current development code requirements. And one thing also worth noting here, but I kind of said in the first one, was we didn't go talking to all the businesses in this area about their specific parking needs and how they use it either. So so looking at the existing supply versus demand, so as far as what is there were 304 on-street stalls within this boundary. Some of them have restrictions, but most of them don't. Most of them, the restrictions aren't too long. You can see the 2-hour restrictions is probably the most common, which is that green color through here, where it's kind of that orangish yellow would be no restrictions at all. But again, we didn't notice any enforcement out there, and certainly noticed cars that were in spots a lot longer than what they were signed for. Off-street, there were 410 off-street parking stalls. Those are all private lots. Those aren't public parking lots. So in total, that was 714 stalls. And again, we looked at weekday and weekend. The weekdays, you'll see here, I've got a couple of slides. This is the weekday slide. The next slide is the weekend. The weekday demand was a lot higher than on the weekend. In fact, if I kind of flip back and forth, the y-axis here is exactly the same for these two graphs. So if you see the bars move, that is scaled appropriately. So weekend was quite a bit less activity than weekdays. So if you can see the legend there, the dark kind of blue colors, that's the on-street parking for each of these hours that was counted. The green is the off-street, and then the total is the gray. And the peak happened around lunchtime on a weekday. So again, you can see the Saturday time period. The demand just was consistently less, and it didn't peak quite as predominantly towards midday. It seemed kind of more even once you got to around 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. So as far as what we saw for how that parking was being used under existing conditions, so kind of stepping through this in this table here, there's the on-street versus off-street in total. Again, the on-street, where there was 304 stalls during that peak period, 165 were being used. So it was about 54% occupied in total. Off street was similar. They had 410 stalls, but only about 202 were being used. So that was 49%. So in total, it's about 51% occupied. And it's kind of the percentage you're shooting for. It's kind of the general parking design practice. It's about 85%. That's usually what you design for. So you don't want 100% of your parking to be used, because it makes spots really hard to find. If you can imagine, if you went to the Heights and you knew there's only one parking spot open, you'd probably have a heck of a time finding it, versus if there were 30 or 40. So really, 85% should be considered kind of that maximum. So still well below that. Also, obviously, if you kind of see from this figure over here, what this is doing is it's color coding and shading by the amount of occupancy for both on-street, which are the block faces of the thin lines, as well as the lots that we counted, which are kind of the blocks here, the squares or rectangles, where if you see it in red, that's, it was 85% occupied or more, so it was pretty full. If it was purple, that's 70 to 84%, so it was getting full. And then yellow is the next step down, and then greens, it was less than 55%. One thing to note here is, the size of these squares doesn't mean that was a big block, a big parking lot. These are tax lots, so sometimes you're like, this one you might be able to see a lot of that as a building. So it doesn't necessarily mean that was a huge parking lot. And then also, you have to be careful with this also, in looking like in a block face like this, where it's red. I think there's only 2 parking spots on that whole block face. So they were probably full all the time, but there were only 2 of them. But, kind of what this does tell you is, as far as, the demand versus supply, it's obviously not going to be completely uniform, right, throughout the Heights. There are areas where, the demand versus supply kind of comparison is a bit tighter, and it can be harder to find spots. And so that's those areas where, you can see there's kind of these contiguous chunks of red, right, through this area. This part of 12th, right, was clearly busier with parking. And then down around here, 12th in general the parking seemed to be more occupied than on 13th. But also in general, if somebody's having a hard time finding a parking spot, on the block face they want, there's usually, within, a one city block, 200 feet or so walk, there's probably another block face where there's plenty of parking available. So there is parking nearby. And so I'll throw out a number here, because this is going to come back later. So when they said there's 367 stalls being used, we do a couple adjustments to that, because we want to know, what the demand really is. We tweaked that number a couple ways. One was, we didn't know exactly how many of the businesses in the Heights were maybe unoccupied at the time we did the counts. We took some guesses just based on observations, and maybe being conservative, we wanted to assume, let's say it was 90% were occupied. So we applied another 10% kind of a confidence factor to that demand, just to make sure that we're covering everything, the true kind of full demand of the Heights. And then also, again, we adjusted up another 15% because we want our demand to match that, that 85th percent limit, not the full 100%. So it's what's called a calibrated true demand number. Basically, that 467 is what we would use as kind of the number for the demand that we want to accommodate under existing conditions. Again, compared to the 417 total that's there, it's much less, but that number will come back into play here when we do the future projection and kind of bring that together. So looking at the future, so the growth assumptions I mentioned, so we used employment and housing growth assumptions through the year 2040 within the Heights District. And we obtained those from some modeling that was done for citywide transportation planning. Last time that was updated, I believe, was in 2017 when the West Side area concept planning work was done. And in essence, what that involved was, the city, we have housing and employment growth totals for the city. And we worked with city staff to kind of figure out where that growth between today and the year 2040 would be allocated throughout the city. And so we use that for the kind of the zones within the heights that we had. But we noticed when we were looking at that there was essentially no growth in housing assumed within the heights area. And so we wanted to increase that, knowing that there not only has there been recently approved a mixed use development, but there's a desire for more of that. And so we had, this table kind of shows the growth assumptions that we used. So it's an additional 93 employees, but then the 32 households, that would represent, what's already been approved for that mixed use development. And we assumed, let's assume that 2 more similar developments happen somewhere in the heights. And so the growth is what we call the high growth residential scenario. The assumption that we used for the future growth, parking growth demand was this over here. It was the high growth. So it's 96 households and 93 additional employees. So again, as I mentioned before, so we got this growth. We assume the same parking characteristics today would just apply to the future. So the same ratios of building to number of parking stalls or demand in parking would apply. We use that high growth residential scenario. So what we come out with in total was a growth of another 190 parking stalls would be the additional demand. So again, if we add that onto that 467 number I just showed you, that calibrated number for the existing demand, that comes out to the total future parking demand of 657. And so just kind of a few takeaways from this before I kind of open this up for questions and discussions. Just kind of a reminder, a few things that we learned is the current parking demand in the heights as a whole is well below the supply of parking. Again, it's about 51% occupied. The peak parking demand is occurring on weekdays during the lunch period, likely during the summer, which summer tends to be the busier time of year in Hood River for travel activity. Parking is definitely more heavily utilized in some areas of heights, but it's generally available within one block. And then the parking supply is not consistently managed or enforced. So again, kind of bringing those numbers together where we're showing the 714 existing parking stalls and that future demand, a total of 657, that's a surplus, just subtracting those numbers of 57 parking stalls. So that, of course, that counts for that summertime peak activity, that accounts for 100% of the buildings being occupied, accounts for future growth. And that's that 85%, target, right? So if you were to meet that 657, it means you'd actually have 85% more stalls than would be used. So improvements on 12th and 13th Street and the TSP, just for context, because I know we're still looking at different alternatives for streetscape improvements, and we don't have a specific number for how many parking stalls would be removed with them. But just for context, that the TSP improvement that just kind of had one side of 12th and one side of 13th had parking removed to put in bike lanes, that would be about 84 parking stalls. So comparing that to the 57, that's more parking stalls than that surplus is showing. That said, also, there's things where obviously we're trying to create a more multimodal environment in the heights. We're assuming there's going to be transit stops in the heights in the future where there aren't there now. Obviously, we want to create a more low stress walking and biking environment that's going to encourage some mode shift away from automobiles. Of course, everyone asks, well, how much mode shift? How much is it going to be? It's a pretty tricky thing to kind of guess, just based on what's been found with other travel demand strategies and transportation modeling. I would say maybe 5%. I think if you even 10% or more is probably a very aggressive assumption. But even a 5% reduction, I mean, that equates to about 33 parking stalls. So it's still significant. And that's, if you add that, to the surplus, now we're right back in that range where, at least with the TSP, alternative, it's about the same as what they're talking for parking reduction potentially. And again, also, as we mentioned before, the current parking supply, it's really not being managed or enforced in any way. And I think, kind of some more purposeful management of that parking would certainly help kind of get what you need out of that, making sure that it's being used appropriately, is available when you need it. So with that, I will turn the floor back and you have questions, and who's facilitating? Dustin?
I think we'll turn it over to Pat and the committee. If you have questions, we're here for your discussion and to help sort through this. This informational item, it's something we're looking for your reactions to as we take this through and build a streetscape plan. And I think a couple things I wanted to comment on for John. John mentioned the improvements in the TSP that would remove 84 spaces. That's the current approved plan. So, but for changes to the streetscape now, that's the path we're currently on. And I think another thing in John's table to the left side here, that assumes in some of this, that's the parking demand needed. We would also look, as we did future growth assumptions, in some of the residential projects, we're going to make assumptions that they are going to build in additional parking. So that demand is not only what is on street and public and private lots, that's also going to be demand generated by and supplied by developments that occur. So for example, we alluded to the 30-unit development that has been approved. They're going to add 20 parking spaces to the mix. So it's going to be, that's going to add, developments are going to add supply as they come online. We assume there's going to add some supply to as they add to the demand as well.
And I would maybe say, or offset off-street stalls that are removed as a part of development. If there's a surface parking lot that gets redeveloped, that would help offset the loss of that.
Okay, does anybody have any questions for John?
I don't really have any questions, but I have some thoughts if you want those.
Yeah, go ahead, Amanda.
Okay. Yeah, so I guess the main things that I'm kind of hearing or focusing or taking away from all this is that well, first of all, like the enforcement of it, since it's so underutilized right now, I don't think there's a current need for enforcing parking regulations in the Heights. So I don't think we need to get the parking person up there and but I do see what you're saying about in the future, if there is an issue, then we could enforce it and that would help spur things. But since we don't have a parking issue, I don't don't really want to see that as a highlight. Not that that's what we're talking about, but just throwing that out there. And focusing on the fact that on the current situations, even where there is a high volume of usage on those blocks, that there is something very close. You don't have to park directly in front of the business that you are patronizing. It's okay to walk a block or even 2 blocks to get there. And I think that we just really need to remember that. In some cities, you have to walk. I mean, I know we're a small town, but it's still okay to walk a block to get to where you're going. So I don't want that to be a barrier that people are oh, I can't park right in front of my business. So that I don't like that. I also want to focus on the future of less driving and more walking and more biking. I think that is going to make a big difference in the number of parking spots that are needed. So I'm glad that you brought that up at least. And I just want to keep that in the back of everybody's minds that is going to affect the projections. So, and then my last kind of question or concern, I guess, about the numbers is the parking lots, because I'm not sure how many are publicly owned and private. I know some are definitely privately owned, and those privately owned lots could turn into buildings, which equals zero parking and more demand for parking, I guess. So how that, if we can even plan for that, or what the numbers are of like the publicly ones that we know we have control over versus the private parking lots that might turn into buildings at some point. So that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. I guess that to tag on to the end of Amanda's there, I think in reading through this that there were no public or city-owned parking lots on the heights. It was all private. And that's one of the concerns I have with the high percentage that are on the private off-street parking is what happens if a person decides to develop that. Prime example would be right behind Riley's off of Hull. There's 40 parking spots. If they decide to put something in, there's 40 that are gone. So you're losing 10% right off the top just in one lot. So that's one thing I think we have to take into consideration. Overall, I thought the study looks real good and a lot of good information. So anybody else got any other comments?
I'll say also, this is Abby Pepperville, that my 13th and T3 is also a private lot, and they already have existing issues with managing the parking for those private spots. And yeah, I just think any development needs to definitely take into consideration that the occupants, like children, have a vehicle, and that there needs to be adequate parking related to the development.
John, were you able to get that?
I have like got muted or unmuted or something, but yeah, just we noticed some patterns of utilization of private lots very frequently. We hope that we're able to sort of design things so that those spots aren't impacted.
All right, that's totally unintelligible, whoever that is.
Yeah, that was Abby, I believe, but yeah, I couldn't, she was breaking up real bad on my side. Anybody else got any comments? Clint, what did you think? You're right in the middle of all of that.
Yeah, I apologize for my voice. I got a bad cold too. Feel it for John. Pat, I was going to follow up on what you said about private parking, specifically the one across from us behind O'Reilly's. They don't utilize their parking really at all. So I realize if they develop that, it would create more demand for parking, most likely, but it's not used now. So it's kind of a moot point. There's a possibility I could participate more in data gathering. I realize this study was pretty limited in its terms of its data gathering scope, and we have our sales tracked by the minute. So that might be helpful for a future study to help with traffic patterns, because we can see it ebb and flow all day long, and show that it doesn't really change seasonally, and it's not perfectly tailored to parking itself, but you can certainly see people coming in and out the door based on sales. So I don't know if that's useful or not, but I'll throw it out there.
Every bit of information is helpful at this stage.
I will say
Anybody
it's
else?
really nice to paint this picture with numbers. It's super helpful for me, and it's a little bit encouraging that my anecdotal feeling about this is spot on to the data.
Well, I love the graphics in regards to showing by block and lot how many spots we're at, so you can see where the concentration of lots availability And as you guys, as retailers, businesses on the heights there, you can see where some businesses are really starved for parking. And then there's, like you mentioned, Clint, across the street at O'Reilly's, they got plenty of parking. You know, it's amazing how it varies from one end to the other.
I've been talking about this issue for a lot longer than the 10 years that we've owned our bakery, but I've had some funny conversations back with Arthur when he was the mayor. And, you know, in the 10 years we have been open, I don't get every single complaint, but I would say there's only been a handful of significant parking issues. And the ones that I have an ear for are about ADA access and, you know, wheelchair access to get to the bakery from a ADA van and such like that.
Yeah. Well, hopefully that stuff will all get corrected with the urban renewal development. I hope, right, Dustin?
Yeah, we had, as we do sidewalk improvements and streetscape redevelopment, ADA is going to be, I mean, ADA did not exist for 50 years when this stuff was done. We have every anticipation of improving those scenarios. And then our partners at ODOT, who control this area, are also under an obligation and settlement agreement to improve ADA access as well. So we have a couple redundant assurances that situation is going to improve.
And I think there's also the public right-of-way accessibility guidelines provide guidance on the kind of number and frequency of on-street ADA parking stalls to be provided. And as a part of the final plan, we'll want to kind of document that so that gets incorporated into kind of future designs.
Okay. Anybody else? Joshua, do you have any comments at all?
I can say this is the first time that we've done a parking study, a comprehensive and modern parking study for this heights. So even in spite of the use in the streetscape project, I think it does provide you all some pretty valuable information aside from anecdotal about even the number of spaces are there. I really find this is really valuable to help not only this project, but for you all in general to get a sense of the place where some of you all conduct business and where your livelihood is anchored. So I'm excited and I'm glad we had the opportunity to bring John in and to do this work. And I think it's really helpful in putting, you know, parking is a sensitive conversation, and having some data and science to back our conversation rather than just feelings and emotion, or to supplement or complement those feelings and emotion, I think is really valuable as we move forward into a design that's going to have trade-offs and competing interests for the limited amount of real estate we have there. So I think I'm hoping this is going to be really valuable for all of us as we go through and make some thoughtful conversations and designs.
The one comment I have to make, though, in reviewing future growth by 2040 is that with the urban renewal development on the heights, maybe we're too conservative on the growth potential and might be limiting ourselves. And now I think is the time to, you know, look at a broad stroke and say, hey, the growth's going to be greater, because I see a lot of potential. I talk to people, and there's a lot of people that can't wait for this to happen no matter what, because it'll be a driving force from downtown to the heights. So parking may become, it's not a problem today, but I think it could be a problem if we underestimate the potential. Clint, you got something else to add? Mooch yourself,
With
you're
that.
muted. Okay.
Too bad Jack wasn't here. We could talk about parking management and
Well, the thing is, I did notice in there one thing about restrictions and metered parking, and I figured John threw that in for the benefit of Jack.
Yeah, thanks,
Go
Pat.
ahead,
I
Clint.
agree that we could quickly ramp up to 85% or more with some more, you know, vibrant businesses in the heights. And I'm sure there's a lot of people waiting for that opportunity to come to the heights. I lost my train of thought a little bit about what I tried to listen to the parking emotion arguments and hear where they're coming from, where those complaints are coming from. And it seems to me that someone who will complain that they have to walk a block to get to the business as their target won't complain if they go to Walmart to that massive asphalt and walk the equivalent of 2 or 3 blocks through all the unmanaged traffic that's speeding and turning and switching. And I think the reason is that doesn't seem threatening because it's a parking lot, but crossing a main arterial where people are driving 45 is threatening. And I do hear that. And with some people, I'll bring it up and ask if that's really their underlying reason. And some people I don't, but for me, that's a concern when I'm driving to my own business. If I'm going to park on one side of the street or the other, I think, well, do I really want to cross the street right now at 11:30? Maybe I'll drive past and walk back on the other side. So throwing that out there.
And I think that's an important part of the kind of messaging and discussion with the community is, what we're trying to do is create slower, calmer streets along 12th and 13th to make them easier to cross. And that kind of reinforces or justifies kind of drawing that boundary, a half a block or a block to the east and west of 12th and 13th, because a lot of people will just say, well, what is your utilization or kind of parking use on those streets? And it's different, right? And there's less spots.
The other comment that I have is in regards to outside the arterial driving into the residential. If we end up with more residential development just outside the heights, may take in more parking for residential and might limit the ability of employees that are working on the heights parking spaces too. So I don't know if that's been figured into that too, John, or percentage, because there's a lot of different variables, I know, and it's kind of a crapshoot that you're looking at, and you hope you overestimate instead of underestimate.
Yeah, and again, we didn't go too far into the residential areas, partially because just with the nature of the way we're doing that study. But by doing observations, I can't tell how many cars are in people's garages. Sometimes it's 0, sometimes it's full. But yeah, it's hopefully we've kind of got that covered. I think from what we were seeing, but for the most part on the side streets, I don't think we were seeing at least today, a ton of obvious, business related parking too far down the side streets for most of those areas.
Any other questions for these gentlemen?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, is a good point. I think we actually have seen growth outside the corridor too. May Street University has had a big influence on parking along Pine Street and 11th with faculty parking as well as parent drop off that has influenced from May Street from Pine and beyond, especially in that peak flow and that kind of itinerant parking where people shift. So it's something that as the staff we're really mindful of as we see things develop and redevelop. So we have forces in the corridor and forces just outside that we will watch for sure.
Okay.
Maybe the one other thing I would just kind of mention from this parking study and kind of its relationship to the design alternatives that have been developed and the evaluation that the team is kind of working on right now is there was a component of the parking study that kind of gave us some additional kind of time to kind of go through and do an evaluation of the parking counts and impacts for each of the design alternatives. So as a part of our evaluation, we'll have a better idea on what is the parking loss as a result of reconfiguring the streets for adding bike facilities and kind of changing kind of travel lanes. So similar to how John mentioned, the city's current transportation system plan would remove kind of, I think it was 84, 85 stalls. There's going to be some reduction in those new design alternatives that we're looking at, and we'll be able to kind of do an accounting of that as a part of our evaluation.
And that'll be, Nathan, included in future presentations and updates?
Correct. Yep.
Sounds good. Any other questions for John or Nathan in regards to the parking study review or any other comments? not, I guess we'll move on to the next item on the agenda. Thank you, John. Appreciate it. Thank you, Nathan. Next one, I'll turn that back to you, Dustin, in regards to possible West Side District formation, I guess.
I'm gonna flip this one right back to Will too. We're gonna hand off the baton.
Everybody's passing the buck here.
And actually, if we would like to take Jody's comment now, she's signed in.
Okay, welcome, Jody. I guess you wanted to make comments at public comments here, so go ahead. You got 3 minutes, so go ahead, Jody.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so the first is relative to the parking that you guys were just talking about. And this is a new perspective for me, but I think that actually using parking meters as a specifically as a management tool for selective areas is something that is worthy of consideration, so that if we have, I see all our impervious surfaces as super high value real estate. And as soon as we put a parking meter there versus just having free parking stalls, then other people will value it more like high real estate. So I'm not thinking parking meters everywhere in the Heights, but I'm thinking using it specifically as a management tool to encourage parking in the place, you know, in places that you want it. Or actually more important to me personally is to start encouraging more of us locals to actually walk and bike to our local commercial district. And I think if we had parking meters, that more locals would choose that. Because I'd like to see John Boskett's 5% go up to more like 20%. As far, and none of us know what that looks like yet, but I think with the changes happening in transportation in the world, that we're going to see more like 20% instead of 5%. Okay. The second is regards to the possibility of a West Side urban renewal district. I want to encourage you, if that is the direction that the urban renewal is heading, is to be 100% transparent in what you're up to in creating a urban renewal district in West Side, for West Side. I don't personally see that area as a blighted area like the Heights was when you developed urban renewal district for the Heights. So if there's other reasons that you want to use citywide taxes for West Side, then please be 100% transparent in the report or whatever it's exactly called for putting that together. So all of the citizens in the city understand why you want to have a West Side district. And then my last very quick comment is I watched most of the presentation by the consultants on the 12th and 13th Street. And I thought about what I took notes and then I thought about it. And then I put a 1-page summary together that I submitted to Will and Dustin. And I think they shared it with the consultants, but I'd also like them to share it with the Urban Renewal Advisory Committee and the Urban Renewal Board. Because I'm a transportation design professional who lives here, and I have ideas that I would like all of you to actually at least be able to see and consider when you're moving through this process. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Jody. Anybody got any questions or clarifications needed from Jody at all on what she spoke about? Thanks a lot, Jody.
You're welcome.
Okay. Will's going to handle the West Side situation.
I am, yeah. So thanks, everyone. Thanks also for taking this meeting kind of out of normal sequence a week earlier than usual. So this item is following up on that November 18th meeting, sort of exploring a preliminary or conceptual look of what West Side could be for an urban renewal district. And we had a lot of information we provided and time for questions. but that wasn't that was just educational. There was no direction or really official input opportunities there. We wanted to let you have time to percolate on that, think through, digest. And tonight we brought to you a summary of those potential objectives of a West Side Urban Renewal District. And we want to get your recommendation, your input on those to go to the Urban Renewal Agency Board. And really the purpose of this is not taking a concrete step towards urban renewal formation. This isn't a planner report or anything that's outlined in statute. Really, this is just trying to put meat on the bones of what could it potentially look like if we went to the West Side, and that would inform the City Council's decision in 2022 if they do or don't want to really start in earnest concrete steps towards West Side District formation. So in summary, those basic approaches that we outlined on November 18th is, one, focus on existing planning documents like the TSP and multi-jurisdictional master plan for kind of the supply of potential capital projects. Just in the TSP alone, we have over $100 million in needed projects for West Side growth that do not have an identified funding source. The third is to make sure that we include dedicated spending for affordable housing so that the West Side's future includes a range of income types. Urban renewal does a lot of great things, but one of its potential outcomes that we see often is that rising property values, increasing development also increases rents and can displace people. So in the conceptual idea of a West Side, a significant proportion of the money is dedicated to ensure that a wide range of incomes continue to have a home in West Side's future. And then third is balancing those hard infrastructure investments that are directly tied to unlocking tax increment growth and using those to pay for quality of life investments like parks, trails, and other roadway amenities. So within that basic framework, that's what we talked about on November 18th. Dustin and I have added as an appendix to your cover sheet kind of what discreetly could a plan list that meets these objectives look like. And that's solely for illustrative purposes. So you can see the tangible, from strategy, what it is interpreted to mean, at least by Dustin and I, as one set of plans that would meet these objectives. By no means is that the plan or anything close to what the final plan will be. That won't be known for many months out after a lot of process. So that's just context to aid in your discussion today. So the question tonight is, if the city chose to initiate a process to form a West Side District, does this advisory committee generally support the core strategies that I outlined in both direction and in scale? If not, do you have alternate recommendations or input? This is a time to let your ideas and input be known.
Go ahead. Who wants to make a comment? Not, I'll start. I see the value because I've seen the value and how good urban renewal works, and with us developing the West Side. There's just one part that I have problems with, the one part, and that's Parks and Trail. Don't we have a Parks and Rec department for the city that's funded under other tax measures, and you're looking at disbanding that and starting a new one so you can raise the rate? So why should that be under urban renewal when you've already got a Parks and Recs and they've got a budget and so forth, where we could just focus on the transportation and affordable housing side of the plan for urban renewal? That's my point. And that's what I've been thinking about for a couple of weeks, especially after I read what Parks and Recs is looking at doing. So to me, that's double funding, and I like the Parks and Recs idea. there's parts of the city that's been developed that wish we'd have had more parks put in and so forth. But I think they should handle that, and we should just stick with transportation and the affordable housing side of it.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that input, Pat. So the Parks and Rec District, is separate from the city. Just want to make that clear. They collect systems development charges for expansion of parks facilities. City of Hood River does not collect SDCs for parks. We have no dedicated funding source for parks as the city.
Parks and Rec cover county-wide inside the city and out, doesn't it?
Correct, it does. Yeah.
So they're gonna, with the affordable housing and all those development charges that are gonna happen, they're gonna be getting funded from it. So why should we also be funding it through urban renewal side when they should be able to fund it through the system development charges?
Yeah, I can't speak directly for the Parks District, but I'm pretty sure it's safe to say that they would argue that is SDCs are helpful but insufficient for the total need for parks. And I think
they're looking at they're sorry to interrupt.
Oh,
you,
sure.
Will, but they're going from 30 cents per thousand up to $1 per thousand on a tax base now is what they're proposing. And that's a pretty healthy jump.
I agree with you. I know from talking to their executive director, most of that is going to be used for debt service, for borrowing to replace the pool. And so won't actually be used for any sort of near-term parks development until the pool, whatever bonding is done for the pool, is paid off with some of that extra money. I did put in kind of one of the concepts that's built into that project plan is that 50% of the money for any future parks would come from SDC match. Would have to be agreed to by the Parks District, but I've through just initial discussions and with the Parks District Director, he said that was probably a fair assumption to use for planning purposes, that any money dedicated with urban renewal would be matched with their SDCs to build identified park sites on the west side. So that's not to say that I don't take your point and your input, Pat, and I appreciate it.
Okay. Anybody else got any questions or comments for Will? So what's the next steps? Go ahead, Amanda.
I guess one of my I don't know, is mysterious affordable housing. Like how do we use money to make housing affordable? I just, are we subsidizing rents? Are we, it just seems so vague and obscure. Like we can say we support affordable housing, but like when it comes down to reality, what does that look like? I guess is one of my questions.
Yeah. 780 Rand Road is what it looks like. We purchased with $1.2 million. We purchased 7 acres of property, and we issued a RFP for developers to develop on it. We had 7 developers send in on request for qualifications, essentially like turning in your resume. From that, we chose, this all happened this last year. We chose from that 2 to shortlist, and we interviewed them. And just a couple weeks ago, we selected community development partners to develop it. So their pro forma still has about $1.5 to $6.5 million in gap, but they have the ability, and we are moving forward with developing 122 units of affordable housing on 780 Rand Road. So what they're able to do is bring in state and federal tax credits and then own and operate that at regulated affordable prices. So the rents are between, I think, $400 and $1,000 a month, depending on how many bedrooms. And it's also tailored to your income level. So they're tailored. We have 100 units slated for 60% AMI, 30%, and 20 units slated for 20% area AMI, which is area median income. So they are by law regulated affordable. And that is going to be built, but it has a funding gap, and this could be one way of closing it. And then replicating these economics over and over again, acquiring more land and doing the same process to bring in a developer to build more affordable housing. And that's in that table that's attached with our cover sheet. That's the assumptions that are built into those numbers, is replicating the economics that we're already making happen on 780 Rand Road.
Okay, and so does that mean the city owns that housing, or the city owns the land that, like, what you said, the city bought it? Could you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, it's part of our contribution. So, the business has to pencil, and the developer needs to be able to cover their costs. And so one thing that we're contributing to the developer for the promise of affordable housing is we're giving the land for free. There's still a funding gap, so we will also need to be giving them a direct payment. So essentially, we are buying an affordable housing complex with 122 units. At the end of the day, it's probably going to, with the value of the land and the money that's not going to need to be spent for closing the funding gap, probably between $2.5 to $7.5 million, and that generates 122 units of regulated affordable housing that will be in perpetuity operated by the housing authority, so the local housing authority. So that $7 million is going to be leveraged, and the entire project itself, the total construction cost is over $50 million. So this is one way that if we could get a few $1,000,000, you can leverage it into tens of millions of dollars of state and federal grants to build hundreds of units.
Okay, and that the funding gap is a one-time thing. It's not like a continuous.
One-time thing.
It's a one-time fee. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay, Will, the one question I got is okay, so the rent will be controlled by the housing authority or the developer?
By the state of Oregon sets the rates. Mhm.
And once it goes into that, can it ever come back out to just be a private ownership, and then the affordable housing goes away? Or
Hypothetically, maybe, but the housing authority is going to be the owner and operator at the end of the day.
okay,
I believe the
and
money.
that's separate from the would-be developer, correct?
Yeah. So the developer is going to own it for a period of time until they get paid back. Dustin, correct me on any of this. Dustin, CDP is going to own it for a period of time until they can reasonably make back their investment, and it will transition to ownership by the locally owned nonprofit housing authority, which is mission driven to provide affordable housing.
Okay, I just wanted to get that out there, that people understood that that's how it works. Okay.
Yeah. I think we have two things. In 15 years, Mid-Columbia Housing Authority will have the right to be the not just partial owner, complete owner of this project. And I believe the LIFT funds, which are the monies that are going to be, that the developer is going to compete for, the state and federal monies, I believe they have a 60-year lifespan on them that basically says, in order to guarantee, or in order to be accessible or eligible for these monies, this property ends up with about a 50 to 60 year mandatory affordability ceiling on it. And that's tied to the money. So.
Okay. Well, I just wanted people to understand that that's how the housing authority worked, and so forth, that, everybody makes investments, developers, private developers that don't work through this system, they're in it for making money, like all businessmen. That's what you should be doing, is be in it to make some money and get a return on your investment. But yet working through the housing authority and urban renewal, want people to understand it doesn't work the same way. So.
Yeah, and I do appreciate that explanation, because I'm, hear it a lot. We'll just make it affordable, and like, how does that actually work? So thank you.
Yeah, and I'd be happy to send, I can send you the exact rents that if they were opened up today, what the state of Oregon prescribed rents are.
Yep. So any other questions for Will or Josh? or Dustin, I should say.
Well, I guess
Uh,
one question is, can we still do this affordable housing if we don't have an urban renewal district? Like, what is the, how does that affect it, having the urban renewal district versus not having it?
Yeah, so, well, there's a bit of timing too, whether or not this urban renewal district would be able to be formed quick enough to fill the funding gap for 7080 Rand Road. So it might be about filling 780 Rand Road's funding gap, or it may be about doing another 780 Rand Road and then another 780 Rand Road in the future to make sure that the west side, like I said, continues to have a healthy range of incomes. If urban renewal isn't passed, we have not identified a gap funding source. Potential options could be a voter approved general obligation bond. So basically everyone increasing their taxes in order to fill the gap. Metro in the Portland, Metro Oregon in the Portland area did that. You could, do a sales tax. Well, just any way that you could raise taxes is ways that you could fill the gap. But urban renewal is kind of one mechanism where future growth is used to fund future availability of housing.
Okay, so the urban renewal district would help, like Rand Road's happening, this would help the gap, and it would help doing more projects like that in the future. Is that?
Yeah,
pretty much
let me pull up the Excel. So this is what was in your packet. And this was sort of the notion of what would meet those objectives is, so a bunch of transportation projects from the TSP, parks and trails projects, and then filling the gap for Rand Road, acquiring another piece of land at the same price, doing some sort of owner occupied project, and then developing another. So it's broken up here where I have land acquisition, development, land acquisition, development. So altogether, that 382 housing units, if we can replicate the economics that we're currently seeing on 780 Rand Road.
Any other questions? So I guess the question I have is where do we go from here? Is the Urban Renewal Board looking for a recommendation from the advisory committee? Is that what you're after, Will?
That's what I'm after is, November 18th was just a one-way communication with questions. Tonight would be this body's time to have your preliminary message back as to good idea, bad idea, kind of a threshold question of urban renewal at all anymore. After Columbia Cascade and Waterfront closes, do we want to continue to use urban renewal in Hood River? If yes, does West Side seem like the logical place? If yes, do these seem like a good set of core objectives for the district?
The question I got on your spreadsheet under transportation, interim 62 interchange improvements, is that the roundabout at Wine Country, or is there something changing at the freeway?
Dustin, you're probably best to answer that.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. So exit 62 has its own set of issues due to the shortness of the deck. And in our transportation system plan, ODOT allowed us to do some slip lanes and some partial improvements to 62 that would help improve the functionality of exit 62 without rebuilding the whole thing. And in the end, exit 62 in the sometime distant future will need to be rebuilt. This is a series of improvements that would just help improve it without rebuilding it. And then part of it went into the assumptions of making exit 62 a more functional, yet not completely redeveloped interchange. And that's why they're referred to as the interim, because one day the whole thing comes due for improvement.
Oh, I hate to see spending $7 million on an interim improvement and then have to redo the whole thing again. To me, that's kind of double spending, but
I would not want to spend that in if I could come up with the other 50 to do the whole thing at one time.
yeah, okay.
And that's the city's responsibility is the.
I'll resist for a while.
Yeah, so again, I really want to stress this is not the purpose of this right now is not to sort of pick and choose these discrete projects. It's more of this to be illustrative of to help the deliberation on those objectives. What's built into these are all these are vetted, approved, adopted. They're in our transportation system plan. These are the numbers that they are in our adopted transportation system plan. So they're not really up for, are we doing them, are we not? Does it make sense to have urban renewal pay for unfunded projects in our TSP? And these are ones that we've identified that are going to basically strangle the development potential of the west side, because at some point, if these don't get done, there will be inadequate public facilities to support west side development.
Okay, so if I remember correctly, how this all started for the Heights side of it. So if we decide to, the advisory committee decides to give approval to move it forward, there's still a lot of work and additional objectives. You got to nail down all the objectives a little tighter than what you have here, correct, Will?
Correct. Very preliminary discussion here.
And so if we gave permission to move forward, to have it studied a little bit more, we're still going to be a ways out before we're going to have an official plan that we can talk to people about and go public with and so forth. Clint, you got a question?
Thank you, Pat. I just wanted to kind of answer Will more directly and give my wholehearted 2 thumbs up on moving to the West Side District, because I think we can all demonstrate the value of the tool of this urban renewal district in the port, in the Heights, and in downtown. It's an incredibly useful tool to do projects in conjunction with the other agencies that we have to coordinate with and communicate with. It's overseen by a bunch of hardworking people, myself not included, but you all are thoughtful and engaged in it. So it has a lot of oversight and it has a lot of power that way. And it has a lot of community support, I think. And moving the district from one area where it's done its job to another area that could clearly use some help, I think is a smart move. So that's my 2 cents.
Thanks, Clint. Anybody else have any other questions or comments?
Yeah, I'd have to agree with Clint as well as you, Pat. This side of town's like the gateway coming from the west side, and it, clearly needs some help. And, I've been here just maybe 3 years now, but with all the presentations and just, visiting here and, over the years, I mean, urban renewal is very successful in Hood River, and if we have an opportunity to, fix up the west side of town, I'd be interested in seeing it through.
Anyone else? Abby, Amanda? Am I missing anybody? I've seen the benefits of urban renewal. We just did a road trip to Texas and back here before the holiday and drove through a couple of communities that had, you could tell it was definitely urban renewal and what they've done and how much it's, you could see how it's benefited. And with the development, my opinion is, with the exception of the parks and trails, I've got to get some more answers on that. But in regards to the transportation and affordable housing, we're sitting here looking at developing and an area that's by the most part been rather undeveloped. And I feel by having urban renewal involved with it from the start, I think we can alleviate some of the problems we're dealing with on trying to redo the Heights. you know, because there's some real issues on the heights and because it's been in place. So if we have urban renewal involved from the start, I think we can alleviate some problems that our successors 50 years from now aren't going to have to deal with. Does that make sense? Good. I'm glad Clint's nodding his head. I could care less what Will thinks, but no. Sorry, Will. Jack isn't here to pick on, so I got to pick on somebody.
No, it totally does make sense to get out in front of everything, especially ODOT, which is making decisions from a desk in Salem or somewhere else. And, you know, but they do come out here every 2 weeks and replace that guardrail on exit 62 going westbound, you know, because someone hits it because it's poorly designed. And every time I get off coming back from Portland on exit 62 to come home, it's scary to get out there because you can't see the traffic crossing the bridge, crossing the interstate. Like that's just one little example of you know, poor foresight with design that could have been easily fixed ahead of time.
Totally agree with you, Clint. Totally agree. Anybody got anything else? I guess, Will, what do you need? Just verbal approval for you to take her to the next level?
Yeah,
Or take it to the board?
It would, a motion would be great, but not necessary if we just want to do head nods and I just say it was discussed here.
Do we have enough? Sorry to interrupt. Do we have enough people of the advisory committee to make a?
Let's see, 1, 2, 3. Got 4, so yes, 4 of 7.
4 of 7. So
You have 5 of 7, I think 4 affirmative votes.
Yeah, I think we have 5.
Abby is down there.
Oh. I didn't get a chance to answer you, Pat, from earlier. Just it is kind of confusing. Like, are you saying, is this the report and the plan, and there's so much left to go forward, and really is kind of a chicken and the egg of, right? Okay, start the study, but what are we studying? You know, start the plan. What we're doing is just taking a temperature and seeing where you guys are at, and if we just, you know, putting our cards on the table. Okay, if we start in this direction, is it wasted effort or not? When and if we start to take concrete steps, which this isn't. It's just real preliminary temperature taken.
How about this? I move that we consider a much involved discussion about expanding to the west side and shifting focus from the port to the west side urban renewal and talking about implementing this tool there.
do I have a second?
It's really foggy.
I second that.
Okay, it's been moved by Clint, second by Josh. I'm going to do a roll call vote. Clint,
Aye.
Josh,
Aye.
Amanda,
Sure. Yes.
Abby,
I apologize. I'm going to abstain at this time just because my reception is so poor. Can we have meetings in person anytime soon?
yeah, we'll have a meeting again, what, on the 10th of January, Will, or Dustin?
Yeah. Next meeting is of the Urban Renewal Advisory Committee is on the 20th of January.
20th, okay.
I think she's asking for, we're going to meet in person at some point. Or I think that's what you said, Abby. Maybe I could be wrong, but.
Yeah, that's correct. I am really hopeful that at some point, I don't know, my ability to participate effectively in these meetings is would be much improved if the ability to connect like in real life.
Okay, and I'll vote yes, and so it's 4-0 and 1 abstention at this point to carry it forward. I do, you know, there's still a lot of work to do. There's a lot more before this can be created. So we're just putting the wheels in motion to move forward and see what we can and can't do.
And
Okay.
can I reiterate what Abby's saying? I think it's hard for us to understand you, Abby, so apologies, but I think, and that demonstrates what she's saying. I think it's hard to participate on this format. So I know that the city council's been meeting in person, and at the last meeting, like Jack and Pat were there in person. I didn't even know that was an option. So like maybe we could have that conversation about going back into person, or at least having the option, at some point. But anyway, I feel like we're just kind of, can't hear her very well, but I think we should try to listen to what she's saying. So.
Very good point.
Yeah, very good point. I want to make sure everybody's opinions are, and Jack's been that way too. When we're running meetings, we want to make sure everybody's heard and everybody's had the opportunity to express their opinions and so forth. So I appreciate that. And yes, I would like to see the next one in person as well, Dustin and Will. Okay.
Yeah, loud and clear, and the city can facilitate either. We're fully hybrid.
Okay.
So if anyone, most people want to attend in person, but there's still a couple people who don't feel comfortable doing in person, we can accommodate everyone.
So next thing on the agenda from members, if I remember correctly. Any other items from the members of the committee? Clint, there's nothing. Josh, nothing. Amanda, Abby, nothing else. I guess we're adjourned. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you all
Jack's
for your
gonna-
time and
Good night.
making special accommodations. We appreciate you, your service to the community. We look forward to seeing you soon.
Yeah, I'm hoping now that Jack didn't show up, he'll want to buy me a pastry at your place, Clint. Or we'll go to Amanda's and have a glass of wine or two.
Yeah, I'll take you all on them. I'm back for a day or two.
Okay. Everybody take care, and everybody have a good holiday season. Be safe out there.
Have a good night.
Night.